Hey guys, we got a fun episode today. If you're somebody that's ever felt like you feel other people's emotions, even the ones you don't want to feel, we got some good news for you and how you can actually show up really with that connection that you're desiring with that person without having to necessarily feel all the yucky stuff that they're feeling too.
There is hope, so come and join us.
See you in there. Hey folks, welcome back to the Catholic Coaching Podcast. My name is Matt.
And I'm Erin.
It's my beautiful bride over here.
And I'm actually sitting on a booster seat right now.
Mm-hmm.
Normally I'm like down here and I'm like trying to get the microphone down so you can see.
Little munchkin-esque.
And so my dog is sitting here too. So Annie's here with us as well.
She may bark. Ignore it.
Yes. So today, guys, we're going to be talking to you about empathy.
I think it's a very important topic because empathy is a great gift that God has given to us, the ability to seemingly feel literally what somebody else is feeling. Now, we're going to talk about some distinctions with that, but like every great gift that God has given to us, it's kind of been impacted a little bit by the fall, right? So empathy can kind of go to a way of bringing us to greater connection, but there's also a way of using it or abusing empathy so that it actually leads the opposite direction to greater divorce or disconnect or blame or vicious stuff. So we all want to be living in that very virtuous use of this great gift that God has given us to be able to really connect, not just on an intellectual level, but on an emotional level. And that's a beautiful gift of empathy.
I actually want to start with definitions. Is that okay?
You always do. You're the word nerd. Let's do it.
Word nerd.
Word nerd.
We need one of those like bells and like a little caption that comes with like, word nerd.
Word nerd.
Yeah. Okay.
Tim, work on that.
So the word empathy comes from the Greek word empatheia, which is a beautiful word. Really pretty.
Empatheia. We could name our next daughter Empatheia.
Well, I mean, she
Maybe.
would have to be completely
Maybe not.
virtuous. Otherwise, she would
Yes.
fall into a lot of these traps that we're going to be talking about today. So empathy comes from the Greek word empatheia, which means in. Well, it comes from the two roots in, and pathos, which is feeling. So you are literally in feeling with others. I think of Christ taking on our sins, especially as we are coming to Holy Week right now.
Yeah, when we're recording this.
And when he was in, experiencing the agony of the garden and really feeling our emotions with us and our
feeling
pain
our
and
sins,
our sins with us. So there's that empathy to feel, to be in feeling with others. Sympathy, because a lot of these people get these two mixed up.
Yeah.
Sympathy comes from the Greek word sympatheia, and syn, the root, means together, and pathos means feeling. So to actually feel together with somebody. So you're kind of like, well, it seems like you're kind of splitting hairs. What's the difference being in an emotion and then together with somebody? And I think the difference is that distinction is saying you have your feelings and I have mine. And I can actually...
And we are together.
Yes. And I can actually see that you are feeling something and I have a thought that creates my feeling. So I want to kind of go back to the basics here.
Would you say that empathy kind of has a little bit more of like an intuitiveness to it versus sympathy, something that is a little bit more cognitive?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like, I think people who are highly sensitive are empathetic. So they pick up on maybe they have like overactive mirror neurons, which is just neurons in the brain that responds to other people's words and even actions, even body language pretty quickly. And I think it's a skill. I think it's a gift. But like every gift, like you were saying before, it can have a dark side, but also it has a great responsibility for it.
Like I think Clifton's strengths, and I think of the strength of Wu, right? This is often called the chameleon strength because literally you will watch somebody kind of almost shapeshift to be able to mirror back with whomever the person that they're interacting with in that moment. And then they'll go to somebody else and they'll shapeshift again. And the goal here with the person is with woo is to make that connection. And so the mirroring is just a way that we connect. Think of a baby that you smile at the baby and the baby smiles back. Or you smile at somebody else and the person smiles back. There's something, or you see two people out on a date, right? And they say, like, if the lady's legs are crossed towards the other person versus away from the other person, like or people in a conversation, they can kind of mirror back. This is even a sales technique that people will teach, is to mirror that of your prospect, mirror the body language.
Building rapport.
The goal is the connection.
Yeah,
Yes.
but I do want to speak to this too, because I think empathy is not an end in and of itself.
Okay.
I think empathy is supposed to move us towards living out our charisms too.
And connection.
And
I
connection.
think that's something
yes,
too.
Yes. Yeah. Coming into union with others. But also, if you think about it, there's intercessory prayer. So like, if you are a highly empathetic person, you would be even more drawn to pray for the person. And like the Lord may have given you this skill and this gift of empathy so that you start praying for more people. He may have done that so that you can act mercifully. Maybe you have the charism of mercy and you tend to others' needs. You can kind of foresee what they might need moving forward. And so there's where that empathy can really be completed in the charisms, in the gifts.
Yeah, because we were talking about, like, again, going back to what do emotions do? They incline us towards some sort of an action, right? And so when we're talking about an empathetic emotion or a sympathetic emotion, right? It's emotion that multiple people are feeling or experiencing independently, but also collectively, okay?
Yeah.
So that shared emotion, and I want to just be very clear, like there's distinctions here. So
Yes.
when I say shared, there's a commonality, but still distinct. All right. That commonality starts to incline us towards some common actions. So I think of a speaker that is trying to rally a room, an audience, to kind of some sort of an action, right? And he or she is starting to instill or evoke some sort of a emotion in people in order to incline the group towards some sort of collective action. That when they work collectively together in that action, it actually brings about something good, something fruitful, right? So we can start to see kind of the dark shadow side of this as well, because we know that not every emotion inclines us towards a virtuous action. And our emotions are grounded. Where do they start? They start in our thoughts.
Yes.
Okay.
Not in other people's thoughts.
Right. Not in other people's thoughts.
Yeah.
All right. So what we want to walk through here is some areas where this empathy can kind of bears the resemblance of the fallen characteristics of our wounded nature by sin, but what empathy redeemed looks like, and how to move from that empathy that may be inclining you towards
Antecedent.
like that antecedent appetite, right? Meaning that it's an emotion that you're feeling very powerfully, maybe collectively, but it's not really been subject to reason, right?
Okay,
And
so a
hasn't
really
passed
good
through
example
yet.
of that is
And so it's not going to be a good end.
Yeah. So a collective empathetic action. A good example of that is Sandy Hook, when there was that terrible shooting, that there was children killed and adults killed, and the whole world responded, and they were like, I know, we'll send stuffed animals. Like, and the local government was like, we can't take any more stuffed animals. Like we have to actually get a warehouse and put these stuffed in. They were sending stuffed animals, like 3 stuffed animals to each family in that area. And it's like, that's an example of wanting to respond in empathy, but not really thinking, oh, this may become a burden. Maybe not everybody wants stuffed animals. Maybe the local government's going to have to buy a warehouse or
maybe
like,
there's some
rent out a warehouse
that we're not even thinking of.
So what we want to talk to you guys about today is how to start to bring in reason to empathy so that we can move from that antecedent, which is before reason, that's what it means, to that consequent type of empathy, which we are considering reason. How should I respond? What would be the best way to respond to this person here?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So you want to jump into our 1, 2, 3, Aaron? You ready to go?
Great. Yeah.
Okay. So the first point we want to address is that if we want to be truly empathetic in a healthy way, right, in a virtuous way, the one that leads to a group mentality that's inclined towards virtuous acts versus inclined towards a victim state. Okay, we'll talk a little bit more about that. I think we have to recognize how our emotional lives are connected yet distinct. We already started to talk about this. Problems when we start to get this wrong, right? When we start to think that our emotional lives are not distinct. We try to fix our own emotions by fixing somebody else's emotions. Aaron, how often does this come up in coaching for you?
Oh, well, you talked about the Gallup Strengths Finder. So I'm number 6. It's very high for me in empathy.
And how does Gallup describe somebody that's high in empathy as a strength?
I don't know. I didn't read it recently.
I could tell you. I mean, it's just there's an inclination to feel the other person's feelings almost on an intuitive level. So when you're high with Gallup, Clifton Strengths, when you're high in certain things, it's like an unconscious competency that you go to whatever that strength dictates. Here, you can connect very quickly on an emotional level with people.
I would say that's a strength in the coaching world is you can connect, you can kind of even speak to their emotions better than they can. I mean, partially because you're trained as a coach, and you're delving into this stuff. But I would say it comes up, it becomes problematic when you what we call jump in the pool with somebody. So you believe their entire story. And you're in it with them. You're like, let's say they're talking about their like sister-in-law who's terrible to them. And you're like, let's get her. That is not a helpful coaching posture because you've now you've now already made a judgment and you're going into fixing it. And you're not even identifying what the thought is, the thought error there. Yeah. And you're in thought error too.
Yeah.
As the coach.
And so a lot of the times when you feel that empathy, guys, by God's design, our emotions, they communicate to us and they're meant to communicate truth to us. But if that emotional life is not grounded in a thought that is true, we're going to feel, we're going to feel that lie, and that lie is going to feel true, okay? And what will happen is we will show up to solve the problem without a clear understanding of what the problem is based on false facts. So say, for example, you brought up how like somebody says, my sister-in-law is always, doing these things, like saying these things or accusing me of this. Okay. If we put that now, if we start to feel that emotion of that person that believes that thought is communicating, my sister-in-law is always belittling me or accusing me of things, and you start to feel that emotion, right? And agree with the story that she's telling, you start to feel the emotion as well that inclines your body on your person to believe that is true. And so what we do is we start the problem solving on the plane of this is fact that the sister-in-law is accusing them of something. But if that's not true, if we haven't challenged that, then the premise is off. And so the solution is not going to be a good solution for it in this case.
Yes.
It might be like, okay, you need to distance yourself from your sister, or you need to cut off a relationship, or you need to set boundaries with your sister. And that may not be appropriate because we haven't really
figured out what's true.
If that's really the problem that's here.
That's
and it can cause more problems at that point.
Yeah. I think actually the number one thought error with being empathetic is I can and I do feel others' emotions. And I want to stop here and pause here because this is the distinction that you've been talking about the whole time.
Yeah.
So why do I call it a thought error? I can and I do feel others' emotions. Well, because you can't. That is a thought error. It's not true. Think about where other people's feelings are coming from and where your feelings are coming from. Your feelings are coming from a thought. other people's feelings are coming from a thought in their brain, not a thought in your brain, or your feelings are not coming from a thought in their brain. So, okay, let's go back to this scenario where I'm coaching somebody and I don't know this distinction and I'm like jumping right in the pool with them.
And I said, my sister-in-law is always accusing me of stuff that I didn't do.
And I ask her, how do you feel about that?
I feel really offended.
Okay, so she feels offended. Somebody who doesn't know this distinction goes, I'm feeling offended for you. That is, so I would have a thought that would say, that's terrible. That is terrible. Which would create another emotion in me. It's not the same one. It's not even offended for them. So that's terrible. Maybe you're feeling angry.
Or she shouldn't do that. And then it's like defensive.
Defensive. So I just wanted to show that distinction here. Somebody might look at that and say, you're a very empathetic person. But the truth is you don't know that you're having a thought about what they just presented to you, and it's actually different and it's distinct.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you want to be a really, now I think being able to kind of just enter into it and not necessarily show up as a coach with your friends is there's a difference. We're coaches here.
Yeah.
We're talking about showing up as a coach, which is where we're really an objective sounding board to the person that's sharing whatever's going on in their life. Okay, what is a sounding board? Literally, a sounding board is that board that's behind somebody. Picture somebody up on a pulpit, and there's a board behind them so that the speaker who's speaking out can kind of hear from behind him his own voice or her own voice. It's so that they can have whatever they're saying mirrored back to them so they can hear it as well. Okay, clearly. So that's what we're doing when we're showing up as a coach. We're there as that sounding board to be able to echo back what the person is saying so that they can really look at it and they can really evaluate it at that point.
Can I just piggyback off of this? Because I'm wondering if people even understand why this distinction is important. Because they might be like, no, that sounds like you're a great coach. Like you're in it with them. You're carrying the cross with them, all of this stuff. Maybe you're going to give them really great advice. But what I want to show you is that as a coach, and this is specifically as a coach, and we want you guys to take some of these skills and just apply them to your normal everyday life because it's so helpful. As a coach, what I would do differently, somebody who understands this distinction, my client is feeling a feeling right now. She's feeling offended. And what's going on over there?
Keep going.
And I have not had any judgment of this yet. I just want to know the facts here. So I go, okay, I tell myself I can have any thought I want about this. The thought I'm going to choose as a coach is, what an interesting story. I want to hear more. Not because I'm interested in it. I want to hear if there's truth in it. I want to hear if there's not truth in it. But notice how I don't have to automatically have that thought, that's terrible. There's so many other options before you jump into already creating a judgment.
Yeah. So I think when we tell stories, we use the vehicle of stories because there is an emotional charge to them, all right? There is kind of like the news. It's entertaining because there's an emotional charge to it. And we're trying to have that connection. I think that there's something very normal about wanting to connect through stories. It's literally a huge part of culture, creating this collective identity, cultural identity, are these shared stories that we tell, all right, that have this prepackaged emotion with them, all right? So there's something very ordered to the way that we communicate here. The problem that we're getting into is when those stories are causing an antecedent emotion that we are sharing in versus a consequent emotion that we are sharing in. The antecedent emotion is one that has not really been subjected to reason yet, okay? Meaning it's not going to incline us towards our greatest good, right? It hasn't had the light of truth, of grace that's been infused into it, so that emotion, when it comes after passing through reason, is inclining us towards the good, right? As best as we can know it as human persons. Okay. versus the antecedent when we're just suspending reason. We're just listening, and we're not even challenging whether or not it could be true, and we're just accepting it as truth, shutting off our God-given reason, shutting off this important power to the soul that actually distinguishes us from the animals, and just kind of lazily falling into the story and following along, okay? Sharing in antecedent appetites, empathizing or sympathizing in antecedent emotions, it's not going to incline us collectively towards the good. Rather, it's going to be collectively towards vice. All right, so this vehicle of storytelling, though, is kind of our second point. It's proper to how humans communicate. We don't communicate like computers, just like facts. Nobody likes reading the newspaper because it just gives bulleted facts out. We like reading stories. I mean, even Christ connected with people through stories. He told parables, and he just knew that there was something very proper to our nature to communicate through stories and receive information through stories.
Yeah. Keep going.
So I think back to Clifton's strengths, and people that are high in the strength of communication, very intuitively, they like to communicate through stories, but where this kind of can go a little bit awry and a little bit it needs to be tempered, right? The strength needs to be tempered, is they tend to embellish quite a bit.
Editorialize,
use a lot of hyperbole. It's like, oh, it was the greatest thing ever, or this guy was the biggest jerk in the world. And so when those things are happening, I think it's very important, if we want to be that good sounding board, if we want to just jump in the pool with them, fine. Just go along for the ride, right? Somebody's taking you for a ride. It can be fun sometimes, right? But if you really want to show up and make sure that you're grounding your shared emotional experience in reason, one of the first things that I think that we can do is just recognize that we communicate through stories. And some of these stories may not be communicating all of the facts just yet. And so what I like to do is actually kind of for a season suspend reason.
Yeah.
Suspend judgment, right? Judgment being like making some sort of adjudication as to whether or not the story is real or not, or factual or not.
And when Matt says suspend judgment, it means you're not making a snap judgment on it yet. So you're like, we need to see all the data. We need to see all the information that's possible to see, or just more than what is being presented to me, because I'm only getting one side of the story. I'm getting
a filter.
Clearly a highly editorialized side of the story. And it is very entertaining. However, there are both sides to it. Yeah.
Yeah. Because here's the thing, folks. I think we want to connect with people, but if we connect through an antecedent emotion, the one is not passed through reason, that is going to incline us towards vice. Or it's going to incline us towards victimhood. I see this a lot with people that don't challenge some of the movements that we have out there in the culture.
Yes.
That are really defined by kind of giving victim status to a whole class of people.
Yes.
And it's often when you hold it up to reason, people don't respond with a reasonable argument. They respond with an emotional argument. That's not a discussion, right? That's not a debate at that point. And so this antecedent empathy is something that can really incline us towards away from using our God-given reason.
Yes. Yeah. It makes me think of when you keep saying like collectively, like it being an antecedent. I don't know what the term was, but
antecedent emotion.
Yes, yeah. Collectively, it makes me think of the people who bond over like talking about others. Mm-hmm. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
Like, oh, we have the same negative viewpoint on the same person, and so like let's just bond and talk about this.
Yeah.
But it's not like a real relationship. It's not a relationship that's probably not based on a tremendous amount of truth. Mm-hmm. You know, because it is coming from a story, from a highly emotional, editorialized story.
It's not necessarily what John Paul II would call a virtuous friendship at that point.
Yeah.
It's more of like that pleasure friendship, but here that pleasure relationship is not even grounded in pleasure that is like true recreation.
Yeah.
Right? It's commiserating on something. And I can feel myself doing this sometimes where what's the goal? I'm desiring connection. Even when I enter into gossip, I'm desiring connection with the people that are around me at that moment. Or if I tell like an off-color joke, I'm desiring connection with the people that are around me. But it's something that also has a destructive nature to it. And it's not connection based on something that is virtuous, which means that it's never going to accomplish the goal of connection that I hope it will.
Yeah.
And actually tears at the body of Christ.
Yes. I will say, you want to go into practical steps on like how to kind of grow, like show up in that consequent empathy. I want to start with this. I want to start with you understanding, because you have like a couple of suggestions here, but I want to start with this. You understanding that a person is feeling something because of a thought in their mind, and then you consequently feel something because of a thought in your mind, having seen or experienced that person or spoken to that person. So if you find yourself moving in an empathetic way, a great thing that you can do is say, what am I feeling? Not just empathy, like what is the distinct emotion that I'm feeling? Maybe sad. And then what am I thinking? So let's just say you see somebody who's sick in a hospital, and it's a terminal illness, and they just got like news from the doctor that they're going to die. I don't know.
Yeah.
So that person is thinking their own thoughts and feeling their own feelings, but you see that and you think a thought, this is terrible, or I'm so sad for this person, and you feel that emotion. We're not even saying to question that. You may love that you feel that way. It may be appropriate for you. But just notice that it's not because they are feeling something and you caught their feelings. They might be feeling afraid and not sad. You know, they might be feeling a completely other emotion and from another thought that they're having. Hopeful. So you can't really catch that emotion from them. You are thinking a thought and feeling a feeling. So I think a great application is just to say, when you're feeling empathetic, just to ask yourself, what am I truly feeling and what am I thinking that's causing that feeling?
Right. And also treating the people that you're around and their emotional life as just something that's kind of circumstance, right? It's part of the environment that you are taking in through your common sense power, through your 5 senses. You're just taking it in, and then you have the authority and the responsibility to choose how you're going to think about those circumstances, right? So even if we're saying like on a subconscious level, I'm looking at that person in the hospital and I'm picking up on her micro expressions, right? So I'm not even consciously aware of them, but I'm picking up on these things and I am sensing that these micro expressions are communicating sadness. And then I'm starting to feel sad. There is still, even on a subconscious level, like a thought that you are having about this person, and a thought that you get to choose, and it happens so quick.
Yeah.
And I think what we're saying is it's important to be conscious that that is going on. That's part of the reality, because we don't want people to think that they're stuck feeling sad in that circumstance, or they have no control over whether or not they feel sad, because that puts them in a place of powerlessness, which means that the only way that they can get out of that emotion is to fix other people's emotions, which never works, guys.
So
works.
A good example for that is moving into that place of fixing, because you guys might be thinking like, that's great that they feel sad. Like that is a beautiful thing. It's appropriate emotion. But what you do with that emotion, I think, is a big distinction. So there are people who are like, I know, I'm going to try to cheer up the sick person who just got terrible news. Like,
cool your jets, like, Patch Adams.
Right. Maybe go in and just be like, hey, like totally ignore this and try to like positively think your way out of it. That is from a beautiful intention of trying to help them, but also you're trying to help yourself get out of that feeling of sadness too. So like own that as well. But to come in and be like, try to change the circumstance is, well, it doesn't really work a lot. It's actually highly exhaustive as well. But to come in and try to change the circumstance and not just notice, oh, I'm feeling this and it's actually appropriate and I can sit with this feeling. I can sit with this feeling of sadness. And in fact, I would actually, instead of going and trying to change their mood so I can feel better or so they can feel better too, that might be the reason, I'm going to use this sadness as fuel for intercessory prayer.
Mm-hmm.
Do you notice how that's
different? Which actually
different?
has some power. Like it actually is within my authority to intercede for somebody else.
Yes.
And call upon God's grace.
Yes.
Like put myself in that disposition to be, should God ordain it, to be that conduit of grace to that person in that moment. And we don't want to show up as just ourselves. We want that to be Christ in us who's showing up, because that's what that person needs right at that moment.
This story keeps coming to mind. I recently had a conversation with somebody, and they were like, I'm highly empathetic. I'm a high empath. And it wasn't a coach. It wasn't anyone I was coaching. It was just like a conversation. And
it was E.T.
What?
It was E.T.
Yes.
He feels Elliot's feelings.
Yes. So anyway, they were talking about a friend of theirs and like how the friend is very is anxious. And so this person was saying like, I don't want to be around this person because I feel anxious. And this is a perfect example of somebody who does not know this, who does not know that no, I mean, you might feel anxious. That might be your way. That might be your mirroring. But did you know that you actually have an option of being like, I don't have to feel what she's feeling. I don't have to be thinking what she's thinking. And the funny thing is that they're having two completely different thoughts. So, I mean, her friend might be feeling anxious, and then she might be feeling aversion, right? Like, I don't want to be around that. And that's the thought that's in her head. So you're not feeling anxious. You're actually being like, I don't want to be around that, and feeling another completely different emotion. And the reason why I keep making these distinctions is that we're different. We do have different thoughts and we do have different feelings. But in her case, the best way that she could deal with this is just to get away from the person. And I'm wondering if it's like, if you really love that person, I wonder if it could ever come to the place, if you could ever come to the place where you would just notice that they are anxious and that you have an immediate reaction and want to get away, but then you go, maybe I'll choose curiosity. Maybe I'll choose something else. Like maybe I'll choose another thought because I can't catch this person's anxiety. Now, we are not saying you need to be around difficult people all the time. That is not what we were saying. Know your limits for sure. Know how far along you've come. Know your growth, right? Sometimes we can be around people a lot and have a lot of pride around that and say like, no, I can handle this. But like, know your limits. But I also want to challenge and say like, you don't have to automatically think something because somebody else is highly emotional in your presence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when we get back down to some practical steps here on how you can show up empathetically from a consequent emotion, right? You're sharing a consequent emotion, meaning it's passed through reason. Those are the emotions that are going to build the kingdom collectively and get us really have fruits of connection, right? But also have fruits of freedom, right? You're freely showing up in those places, freely choosing those things. And kind of a little side note, this is also, these steps here that we're going to share are also things that are going to build up your resistance to brainwashing, which is a real thing, okay? It happens when somebody presents information to us with a real prepackaged association, an emotional charge to that information. And when we suspend reason, we just go, I take it. Like we can start being inclined collectively towards those antecedent ends that aren't really good. Okay, so first thing, I think it's important when, say we're in a situation, picture yourself in a situation where somebody is sharing an emotional story with you. I think it's important to acknowledge the reality of the other person's emotion, right? So what would be the opposite of this? When somebody says, I'm sad because of this, we say, oh, you shouldn't feel sad.
Don't feel sad.
Or we put like kind of well, that's silly. Or we have some sort of a judgment on their emotion, on whether or not they're feeling what they are really feeling. We're not going to win that battle, right? Let's just like put that into the C line. And
it's
just
not
allow
charitable.
it to be circumstance.
I will say it's not charitable.
Yeah.
To fight people on their thoughts and their stories, like that is not what we train coaches to do. We don't like tell them to fight people on
it's
this.
It's not seeing them.
Yes.
It's literally not seeing them, which when we're communicating, we have a desire to be seen, right? Especially if it's a deeply personal story. So I think that step one is just acknowledging that there's a person here that's feeling an emotion. They are describing the emotion that they're feeling, and we're just allowing that to be, right? And without some sort of denial to it.
Yes. What's the second thing?
Second thing is acknowledge that you're not there to fix the other person's
Ooh,
emotion.
this is like the Christ complex.
It's a big one.
Remember, Jesus came to take our
Resist it.
sins and to take our pain. Like in some cases, we can do redemptive suffering, but we're not called to do it for everyone. And we're certainly called to do it from a cleaner place than this, because this is abdicating your own emotional responsibility over to all the people around you. And let's just like, for example, say that somebody's highly emotional around you. Like you're abdicating your emotional responsibility over to them.
So I can kind of give an example here.
All right, do it.
So if you've listened to the podcast for a while, Erin does not do well when she is woken up a lot in the middle of the night. It doesn't bug me quite as much for some reason. It's a little bit easier for me. So recently, our daughter was coming into the room multiple times, just waking up to do whatever, right? Just 3.5 years old. So there was a point where Erin was really frustrated, and I wanted to help, and at the same time, I knew like that her frustration was coming from her model. It wasn't mine to fix. But where I could show up empathetically is say, okay, I can understand that she desires the sleep. She's got something going on tomorrow. What I may be able to do is switch positions so that she's not closest to the door and de facto the first person our daughter comes to wake up. And so we can change the circumstance a little bit here, perhaps to make an accommodation for Erin, right? So that she can feel not quite as vulnerable, like she's the first line of defense every time our daughter comes in to wake us up, and allow that to kind of just her emotions to settle a little bit. That was kind of like, it was a very clean place where I knew that if I was going to catch those emotions and make her model my model and have that anxiety well up in me, I also was not going to be able to fall asleep, because that's just not how you fall asleep.
Yeah, that's a perfect example.
Okay.
And where your empathy led you was a much different place than what it may have in the past.
Right. And I say that you were actually excellent with that too, because you were able to kind of like, I think you know what's going on in those moments, and it's just like, okay, we were able to have a reasonable conversation.
3 in the morning.
Also, at 3 in. I'm very proud of that. Right? Put that in the W column. So I say you're not there to fix their emotions, nor are you there to affirm their story. This is very important. So affirming the story could be things like, you probably heard us, we called story fondling, right? And that is like we're going, oh my gosh, yeah, that's so hard, or yeah, she's such a jerk, or you're just kind of like giving some sort of acquiescing to whatever they're saying is fact and true, and the story is like, yes, it's 100% true.
So can you speak to why that's a bad thing? Not even a bad thing, but like just something that we don't do. And I feel like it helps.
I can see how we do that sometimes, like when we're around friends, and it's just like you're not showing up as a coach, okay? Because it's not necessarily a friend relationship there. But as a coach, where it can be very destructive is you're there to be that sounding board, to mirror back to them what is going on in their interior life and the consequences that are coming from it. And if you are jumping into their story with them, then again, you're accepting certain things as fact that aren't fact, right? You're not challenging it. You're just allowing the antecedent emotion to just continue to carry that person. And now you be swept up in that antecedent emotional stream that leads down a path of collective victimhood and vicious ends, right?
Yeah. I think the example that you're kind of using, like, for example, it's like, oh, it's like so sad. Like, life is happening to me. I have no control over these circumstances, blah, 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 blah. Right? Like, that's like an example of coming in and story fondling. I would say, I think one reason why it's not helpful is I want you guys to think of neural pathways in the brain. Most likely this person has told this story a couple of times, either in their head or to other people, but that's a really strong neural pathway. And the truth is when we tell hurtful stories about ourselves, about our lives, like
in the past,
unnecessary hurtful stories, and then we strengthen that neural pathway by continuing to tell it, as a coach, it's not helpful for us to jump in and go, yeah, like, strengthen that neural pathway even more, because your job as a coach personally, I mean, for me is to let's identify what areas are creating unnecessary pain, which I bet it's this part of the story. And I bet you it's this part of the story. And I bet you it's this part of the story. Now your job is way harder to break that down. If you come in and go, I know. But we are saying you can validate the person's emotion and say, that is you feel sad.
Yeah. And I think that's an important distinction. It's like, and this kind of goes into the next tip. I think there's ways of acknowledging their story and their emotions without necessarily affirming it. And so that could be in statements like, I can understand how that can be very difficult. You see how it's just like, I can understand how what you're experiencing can be a very reasonable response to this, or not even a reasonable response. It's I can understand why you're feeling how you're feeling.
Yeah.
It's different from saying like, you shouldn't be feeling that. Like, even like we as coaches, we never say that.
No.
Because it's not helpful.
No.
Now the person feels bad or they feel like they're stupid for going that way, but it's not. It's actually when people feel an antecedent appetite, which means that they haven't really brought all the facts into consideration. It's like, really what you're saying is, I can understand that when you look at just this small piece of the factual pie over here, that you can arrive at that conclusion.
Yeah. Like,
and then as a coach, we start to expand a little bit of the facts that are on the table to open them, the client, to other possibilities, other perceptions of looking at that circumstance, so they don't feel like they're a victim to feeling just this response, this feeling to this circumstance.
I want to speak to this real quick, because there have been times where I've been coaching people and I'm like, that's a completely appropriate emotion to have. I'm like, you lost your grandmother? Yeah. Like, that's appropriate to feel grief.
You almost said should.
I know, I caught myself.
But yeah, like there's something, I like to say there's something very ordered about feeling sad when your grandmother dies.
Right.
Because there is something very ordered about it.
And then, but also seeing in your client, like, and it's like, but also, here's how you process this emotion if you would like to do that. And see, now we're moving into another phase. But I think understanding appropriate and I think unnecessary or indulgent emotion, I think that's a really big distinction too. Maybe we have to do an entire podcast on that. But
yeah. So I can understand how you feel that way. I can understand why you may see this circumstance that way, why you may be thinking that. I can feel how much you are hurting right now. That, I think, is even acknowledging, like, I can see that you're hurting. I can sense it. I can sense it. Like, there's a connection. That's what this person is desiring. And so why deny the connection? We can connect without affirming the antecedent story, the antecedent emotion.
I love the description of, and obviously this is all coming from like our lens as coaches, but the description of allowing your client to continue to punch themselves in the face.
Sure. Yeah.
Well, and this actually works with my strength of empathy, because I'm like, no. The most empathetic thing I can do, if I know these things, if I am like know how to mindset coach people, the most empathetic thing I can do is to help them break this story that's creating an unnecessary pain that's actually making them punch themselves in the face even more.
Right. Which kind of gets us into the last point, and this is something where I think there's discretion when in applying this and using this, because when people are in the midst of their stories, a lot of the time they don't really want to get out of them. They just kind of want to sit with them. And so we can't force anybody out. We can invite people out. And rather than saying, showing up solution mode, this is mine to fix, and be like, hey, I'm just going to start coaching you without your permission. Doesn't go well, right? There needs to be that you can't coach without somebody's permission. So what I like to do if I'm in this circumstance, somebody sharing their story is like, and I've kind of established that connection. It's like I can understand how you may be thinking that way. Do you mind if I share perhaps another perspective, or I see it a little bit differently? Would you mind if I shared? And they say yes or no at that
give
point.
them the freedom to say yes or no, because they're like not ready to let go of it. And you're like, okay, here's what I want you to know though. The thought, that sentence in your mind is creating more of this. That is enough information for them to walk away with at least feeling a little bit of hope. Like, did you know that this could be a little different? And that's it. I mean, but I also think this is where you can apply story in the healing process here, where it's like, I know exactly. And so I've used this statement a lot. It's not even like I know exactly how you feel, or I've experienced something really similar. And here's how it's helped me. And here's how this work has helped me. Now we're connecting through a consequent story. Now we're connecting through a story of redemption and resurrection and healing. And so it's not like, it's like moving away from that toxic story that's creating a lot of unnecessary pain to like, I know exactly what you've gone through because here's my story. Boom. Beautiful. And now there's that connection.
I think that's a great place to end.
Yeah.
So guys, thank you so much. Check us out at CatholicCoaching.com. Check out the Metanoia Catholic Academy, where we are teaching people how to actually apply the stuff that we talk about in the podcast to their lives through coaching, right? We got group coaching and one-on-one opportunities, workshops. It's an amazing Catholic community of people that are, or we have people that aren't Catholic in it too, but people that are really desiring to know and understand who they are as created in the image and likeness of God, and live their life with great purpose, knowing God's plan for their life. So if you've got any questions on that, you want to live with more purpose, come check it out. It's a whole lot of fun.
Yeah. See you there.
All right. God bless.